Have you ever wondered what it feels like to live a life filled with pride, joy, and unexpected turns? Sarah's journey with her son Michael started with immense pride, a tall, handsome, and successful young man who seemed to have the world at his feet. From his early days of academic brilliance to becoming a department head at a prestigious company, Michael was everything Sarah had hoped for. Their bond was strong, their lives intertwined with love, joy, and mutual respect. But life, as unpredictable as it is, threw them into a whirlwind of emotions. Sarah faced heartbreak, betrayal, and challenges that tested her strength and resilience. She watched her beloved son stumble, make mistakes, and lose his way, only to find himself again. All through it all, their relationship evolved, and Sarah's hope for Michael's future never wavered. And just when it seemed that happiness would return, life presented Sarah with another unexpected challenge, meeting the woman her son had chosen to spend his life with. In this moment, Sarah's happiness intertwined with uncertainty and anxiety, leading to a dinner that would change everything. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Sarah was fully aware that her beloved Michael was no longer the little boy who used to cling to her side, his eyes wide with curiosity. He was now a grown man, stepping into the world with the confidence she had so carefully nurtured in him. Soon she knew he would be taking that monumental step into marriage, carving out a life of his own, distinct from the one they had shared for so long. Yet for the time being, Sarah cherished every precious moment they still had together. It warmed her heart to prepare his favorite meals, the aroma of his childhood filling the house once more, and to carefully press his shirts, as if each crease she smoothed away was a small act of love. Every evening, when Michael walked through the door after a long day, she would eagerly ask about his work, about his life, just as she did when he was a boy coming home from school with stories of playground adventures. Lately, though, Sarah noticed that Michael was coming home later and later, a subtle sign that perhaps another woman was capturing more of his time and attention. She suspected that her son had found someone special, yet the absence of an introduction to this mysterious girlfriend left a lingering ache in her chest, a mix of curiosity and an unspoken fear of losing him to another. The thought of Michael's future wife often occupied Sarah's mind, filling her with both anticipation and trepidation. She dreamed of a woman who would stand beside him as an equal, someone who was not only accomplished and well-educated, but who came from a good family, someone worthy of the son who was the very light of her life. Michael deserved nothing less than the absolute best, for he was, without a doubt, her greatest blessing. The pride Sarah felt in her heart was immense. She knew she had played a significant role in shaping the man he had become, a man of integrity, kindness, and strength. Sarah's journey to motherhood had not been an easy one. She had given birth to Michael later in life, a miracle she had never anticipated, a miracle that changed everything. In her younger years, Sarah had been a woman with singular focus and determination. She had thrown herself into her studies, determined not to return to the rural village where cows and chores awaited her, alongside the responsibilities of caring for her younger siblings. Instead, she set her sights on university, pursuing a degree in economics, a field that promised the escape and opportunity she craved. Through sheer grit and relentless effort, she secured her place at the university, a place where she would build the foundation of the life she had always dreamed of. Her hard work paid off. Noticing her potential, the dean himself took an interest in her future, arranging for her to work as an accountant at a prestigious local firm, an opportunity that would have been impossible to obtain without his support. "Sarah, the world is at your feet now," the professor had said, his eyes twinkling with confidence in her. "Don't let me down," and of course she did not. Sarah poured every ounce of her being into her work, often staying up late into the night, her mind racing with numbers and strategies. Her dedication soon made her indispensable, even to the chief accountant, who began to seek her advice on critical decisions. Her salary, which was more than she had ever dared to hope for, allowed her to remain in the city, rent her apartment, and avoid the fate of returning to the village she had worked so hard to leave behind. As time passed, Sarah became consumed by her work, constantly seeking to improve herself. She took every course available, devoured every book she could find on accounting and business, and relentlessly pursued excellence in her field. As the years went by, Sarah's focus remained on her career. Though she was a beautiful young woman and many suitors came calling, she kept her heart firmly locked away. Romance, marriage, and family, these were luxuries she couldn't afford to indulge in. Not yet. Her goals were clear. She needed to establish herself financially, to ensure her independence, before considering anything else. It was an unusual mindset for a woman of her age, especially when her peers were dreaming of love and marriage. But Sarah's dreams were different. They were built on the foundation of hard work and perseverance. And her efforts did not go unrewarded. A decade after graduating, she had saved enough money to purchase her apartment, a testament to her unwavering determination and sacrifice. Sarah had always dreamed of having her own space, a place she could call home. At over 30 years old, that dream finally became a reality. She had worked tirelessly to reach this point, securing a prestigious position as chief accountant in a large, thriving enterprise. Her job was not just stable but also highly lucrative, offering her a life of financial security that many envied. However, as she settled into her new home on that first night, a wave of mixed emotions washed over her. Yes, she was content with her achievements, but the solitude reminded her that it was time to think seriously about the future, about starting a family. The clock was ticking, and society's expectations weighed heavily on her shoulders. Women her age without children were often seen as missing out on life's most significant milestones. Sarah's past was dotted with fleeting romances, relationships that were light and non-committal, serving as a brief escape from the intense demands of her career. These encounters were never meant to be permanent. They were merely distractions, helping her unwind from the pressures of work. But now Sarah craved something deeper, something that would lead to marriage and the pitter-patter of little feet in the future. The desire for a serious, lasting relationship consumed her thoughts. Surrounded by intelligent and accomplished men, Sarah couldn't help but notice the obstacle that stood in her way. Every man who seemed worthy of her attention was already committed, their fingers adorned with engagement rings. It was a bitter realization. She couldn't help but compare herself to the woman who had seemingly won the lottery of life by securing love and family without the intense sacrifice she had made for her career. But Sarah clung to hope, believing that fate had its mysterious ways of bringing people together. One fateful evening, after a long day at work, Sarah found herself in the back seat of a taxi, yearning for the comfort of her home. The night had already draped the city in darkness, and the only light came from the passing streetlights that flickered like distant stars. The taxi driver, a young, charismatic man with an easy smile and a playful demeanor, seemed out of place in her world of seriousness and schedules. He looked no older than his mid-20s, at least 7 years her junior. His name was Brent. From the moment he spoke, his light-hearted jokes and genuine compliments melted away the fatigue that had settled in her bones. For the first time in a long while, Sarah found herself laughing, really laughing. As they talked, the conversation flowed effortlessly, a stark contrast to the awkward small talk she usually endured on such rides. Brent had a way of making her feel comfortable, of drawing out her innermost thoughts with his charm and warmth. Before she knew it, Sarah was sharing details about her life that she hadn't told anyone in years. She wasn't ready for the ride to end. In fact, she secretly wished the journey could stretch on forever. Brent, it seemed, felt the same, as he purposely took detours, extending their time together. When they finally reached her destination, neither wanted to say goodbye. They exchanged phone numbers, and as Brent promised to call her the next day, Sarah felt a flutter of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. True to his word, Brent called the next day, and thus began a whirlwind romance that swept Sarah off her feet. She had never felt so desired, so cherished. Brent's youthful energy and zest for life were contagious, breathing new life into her world. It wasn't long before Brent moved into her apartment, bringing with him an infectious joy that filled every corner of her once quiet home. He was everything she had longed for: attentive, caring, and devoted. Brent took it upon himself to manage the household chores, cooking meals that filled the apartment with delicious aromas and keeping the space impeccably clean. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt truly cared for. But as time passed, the cracks in their seemingly perfect relationship began to show. It took Sarah years to piece together the reality of their situation and to understand that Brent had been using her all along. The realization was slow and painful, and had it not been for a tragic accident that forced her to confront the truth, she might have continued to ignore the subtle warning signs. In the end, the love story that had once filled her heart with hope ended in heartbreak, leaving Sarah to pick up the pieces of her shattered dreams. Brent's days as a taxi driver were numbered once he moved in with Sarah. It didn't take long for him to start expressing his dissatisfaction with the job, painting it as grueling and fraught with risks. He talked about how difficult clients could be and how the long, lonely hours of driving at night were taking a toll on him. Sarah, who cared deeply for Brent's well-being, was initially sympathetic. The idea of him being out on the streets, potentially in danger, filled her with dread. She was relieved when his taxi company eventually went out of business, seeing it as an opportunity for Brent to find a safer, more stable job. However, there was another emotion that she couldn't shake off: jealousy. The thought of Brent meeting a beautiful young woman while driving late at night haunted her. What if he fell for someone else? The intensity of her feelings for Brent made such a possibility unbearable. In the beginning, Brent seemed determined to find new employment. He spent hours poring over job ads, making phone calls, and attending interviews. Yet, each effort ended in disappointment. "Don't worry about it," Sarah would tell him, trying to ease his frustration. "My salary can cover everything." There's no need to rush into anything. Her reassurances gave Brent the license to relax, and he gradually stopped searching with the same fervor. Instead, he took on odd jobs here and there, but nothing permanent. Often, these jobs required him to leave at odd hours, sometimes even overnight. After these trips, Brent would return home beaming, filled with a kind of satisfaction that Sarah believed came from the simple pleasure of contributing financially. She assumed he was glad to feel useful, to help out, and to not be entirely dependent on her earnings. But Sarah was gravely mistaken. One day, Sarah was sent to a nearby town for an audit, a routine part of her job. Brent had already told her that he would be busy with work and wouldn't be home for a couple of days. After the audit, she decided to treat herself to a nice dinner at a local restaurant. She could never have prepared herself for what she was about to see. As she entered the dimly lit dining area, her eyes were drawn to a couple at the next table, a scene that, at first glance, seemed idyllic. A young man was sitting with a beautiful woman, gazing into her eyes with such affection that it would make any passerby's heart melt. He stroked her hand gently, brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, and leaned in to kiss her with a tenderness that spoke volumes about their bond. It was a scene of pure romance, the kind that one might find in a movie. But to Sarah's horror, the man in this picture-perfect scene was Brent. He didn't notice her, which was a small mercy. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. She didn't want to confront him in front of her colleagues. She needed time to process what she had seen and to gather her thoughts before any confrontation. More importantly, she needed a moment alone to grapple with the pain of this betrayal, to let the flood of emotions pour out in private where no one could witness her heartbreak. When she finally returned home, the dam broke. She buried her face in her pillow and wept like she had never wept before. Every tear carried the weight of her shattered dreams. She had loved Brent with all her heart, envisioned a future together, and even imagined the names of their future children, names that she thought would sound perfect with his last name. But now, all those dreams had crumbled into dust, leaving her with nothing but the cold, harsh reality of his deceit. The scene Sarah witnessed that night in the restaurant was like a cold splash of water, jolting her into a painful clarity. The reality of her situation hit her hard. She had been financially supporting a grown man who showed no urgency in finding a job or contributing meaningfully to their life together. It was one thing to go through a temporary rough patch, a few months of unemployment in the face of life's uncertainties. But Brent had been freeloading off her for years, his supposed odd jobs nothing more than a facade to cover up his affairs with other women. This betrayal was the final straw. Summoning every ounce of strength she had, Sarah resolved to reclaim her life and her dignity. She confronted Brent, and with unwavering determination, she kicked him out of her apartment and out of her life for good. Brent's reaction was predictable yet heartbreaking. At first, he scrambled to defend himself, fabricating implausible excuses and trying to weave a web of lies to trap Sarah in his deceit once more. When that didn't work, he switched tactics, professing his love with desperate pleas for forgiveness. But when it became evident that Sarah's resolve was unshakable, Brent dropped the mask and revealed his true colors. His final words were cruel, cutting into Sarah like a knife. "What did you expect? You're old, and I am young. I was drawn to young, beautiful, easygoing girls, and you were cold and bossy. Plus you're fat. Who would want you?" With that, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him, leaving Sarah alone with his venomous words echoing in her mind. Those words haunted Sarah, gnawing at her self-esteem. She began to question herself. Was she as unlovable and unattractive as Brent had made her feel? The betrayal left a deep scar, not just on her heart, but on her perception of all men. Disillusioned, Sarah gave up on the idea of marriage, but not on her dream of becoming a mother. She still yearned for a child, hoping that motherhood might bring her the fulfillment that love had denied her. She engaged in occasional relationships, not for romance, but with the sole purpose of conceiving a child. But despite her efforts, it never happened. Medical help wasn't an option at the time. Seeking assistance to have a child while single was seen as immoral. As the years passed, Sarah resigned herself to the heartbreaking belief that she was infertile. She accepted that she would never have a husband or a child and threw herself into her work, finding solace in her career. Life went on, and as she celebrated her 40th birthday, Sarah's life took an unexpected turn. Gordon, a divorced friend of the company owner, began to take a special interest in her. Unlike Brent, Gordon was mature, stable, and kind. He admired Sarah openly, showering her with compliments, gifts, and gestures that made her feel cherished and respected. Though Sarah didn't feel the same passionate love she once had for Brent, she found comfort and security in Gordon's presence. He made her feel valued, and his attention gradually melted the ice around her heart. When Gordon proposed, Sarah accepted with a sense of quiet contentment. It was not the wild, fiery love she had once craved, but it was safe, dependable, and real. Before they married, Sarah was honest with Gordon. She told him about her belief that she couldn't have children. After all the failed attempts in the past, she was certain that motherhood was not in her future. But Gordon wasn't concerned. He was already a father. His son and daughter were both in university, and he was content with the role he played in their lives. Sarah's inability to conceive didn't trouble him in the least. But fate had one last surprise in store for Sarah. After all the years of believing that motherhood was beyond her reach, Sarah found herself pregnant. The joy and disbelief she felt were overwhelming. It was as if a long-lost dream had suddenly come to life, and the warmth of that realization filled her with happiness she hadn't known in years. Gordon was equally delighted, convinced that they would have a son. He even suggested the name Michael, after his grandfather. Indeed, they did have a son, but the joy was bittersweet. Gordon never got to meet his child. His life was tragically cut short by a sudden stroke at just 47 years old. The man who had brought Sarah such comfort and stability was gone, leaving her to navigate the harsh reality of life alone once more. The loss was devastating, and it took Sarah a long time to recover. What gave her the strength to carry on was the knowledge that a tiny life was growing inside her. She had to be strong, not just for herself, but for her baby boy. When Michael was born, he arrived a bit early, fragile and tiny, demanding every ounce of Sarah's attention and energy. He cried often and needed constant care, but he was her miracle, her second chance at happiness. And even though the journey had been filled with heartache and loss, Sarah finally had what she had longed for: a family of her own. Sarah's life took a new turn as she dedicated herself entirely to her son, Michael. The early years were a whirlwind of medical appointments and consultations. Michael's premature birth had brought with it a host of challenges, including the looming possibility of cerebral palsy. But Sarah, armed with determination and financial resources, refused to give up. She spent a considerable amount of money on doctors, specialists, and the best rehabilitation programs she could find. Her relentless pursuit of quality care and her willingness to fight for Michael's future eventually paid off. By the time Michael was ready for school, he had not only overcome his early health challenges but had also begun to thrive in ways Sarah had only dreamed of. He was a picture of health and even excelled in areas far beyond his peers. The medals that adorned the wall above his bed were a testament to his success, particularly in swimming, where he regularly placed in competitions. A piano, which occupied a corner of his room, stood as another symbol of his accomplishments. Even as a preschooler, Michael had mastered classical pieces that would impress even seasoned musicians. Shelves in his room overflowed with vibrant children's books, evidence of the love for reading that Sarah had successfully cultivated in him from a young age. Michael's academic journey was just as impressive. He consistently brought home top grades, a source of immense pride for Sarah, who had invested so much in his education and upbringing. When Michael developed an interest in programming during middle school, Sarah eagerly supported his passion. She purchased a powerful computer, software, and an array of gadgets to fuel his curiosity. This support bore fruit quickly, as Michael began winning programming Olympiads, bringing home certificates that filled Sarah's heart with pride and joy. It was in these moments that she realized just how far her son would go and the heights he would achieve. All of this was, in no small part, due to Sarah's unwavering dedication. She poured everything she had into Michael's health, development, and education. She shuttled him to clubs, extracurricular activities, and competitions, all while balancing the demands of her challenging career. It was not an easy road. Sarah often felt the weight of going it alone. There were moments when she would watch fathers playing with their children or dropping them off at school, and a pang of sadness would wash over her. She couldn't help but think of Gordon, the husband she lost too soon, and how life might have been if he were still around. Gordon would have been a doting, supportive father, and life would have undoubtedly been easier and more joyful with him by her side. But life had taken a different path, and Sarah had made peace with it, channeling all her love and energy into being the best mother she could be. As she reflected on her journey, Sarah began to see the unique advantages of becoming a mother later in life. Unlike many young mothers who sometimes struggled with balancing their personal lives, careers, and motherhood, Sarah had the wisdom and experience to fully appreciate the gift of a child. She knew that Michael was a priceless treasure, and she never spared a moment or effort in nurturing his potential. Her maturity allowed her to focus on his needs without distraction, ensuring he had every opportunity to succeed. Michael's success continued as he entered university, where he excelled academically. Sarah's pride in him grew with each passing year. However, as he advanced to his fourth year, a sense of unease began to creep in. Michael, who had always been so focused and driven, started to change. He fell in with a new group of friends, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The once bright and determined young man she had raised seemed to be slipping away, replaced by someone she barely recognized. This period was one of the most terrifying times in Sarah's life. She trembled with fear, haunted by the uncertainty of what was happening to her son. Initially, Sarah felt a flicker of relief when Michael began to ease up on his relentless study routine. He had been so focused, just like she had once been, but she knew he was a young man who needed to experience life outside of his textbooks. He deserved to have fun, to build friendships, and to fall in love, things that were a natural part of youth. When he started going out more, even late into the night, Sarah didn't protest. Though her heart was often gripped with fear, her imagination running wild with terrifying scenarios, she kept her concerns to herself. She understood that this was a normal part of growing up, that he needed to spread his wings. However, as time passed, Michael's nightlife became more concerning. His evenings out turned into all-night clubbing sessions, and he would stagger home in the early hours, clearly intoxicated, barely able to stand as he collapsed into bed without even removing his clothes. This was a difficult period for Sarah, one that filled her with a growing sense of dread. It wasn't long before Michael's academic performance began to suffer. The dean of his faculty called Sarah to express serious concerns, warning her that if Michael's behavior continued, expulsion would be inevitable. The news was a crushing blow. In shock, Sarah attempted to talk to her son, hoping to reach the polite, thoughtful young man she had raised. But the Michael she confronted was unrecognizable. He met her concern with hostility, snapping at her with harsh words and displaying a level of aggression that left her heartbroken. The child she had nurtured with so much love had turned into someone she could barely understand. Desperate, Sarah tried to curb his behavior by cutting off his finances, hoping that limiting his access to money would force him to reconsider his choices. She only gave him just enough for transport to the university, believing this would bring him back to his senses. Yet, despite her efforts, Michael's reckless behavior continued. Soon, Sarah noticed that some of her gold jewelry was missing: chains, rings, small but valuable items she cherished. The realization was devastating. Michael was likely stealing from her to fund his nights out, and this betrayal cut her deeply. When she learned that Michael had failed his exams and was indeed expelled, it was the final straw. She confronted him in a fit of anger, but the argument only ended with Michael hurling insults at her before storming out of the house and slamming the door behind him. He disappeared for weeks, leaving Sarah in a state of agony. She was so distressed that she even filed a missing person report, but the authorities didn't take it seriously. "He's just a young guy, probably out having fun. He'll come back," the policeman assured her dismissively. Sarah, overwhelmed with worry, lashed out at the officer, accusing him of negligence and even threatening to report him. Yet, as painful as it was to admit, the policeman was right. Michael eventually returned, but the sight of him broke Sarah's heart. He looked like a shadow of the son she once knew, pale, unkempt, and utterly disheveled, as if he had been living on the streets. It didn't take long for Sarah to realize the full extent of his downfall. Michael had developed a serious problem with alcohol, stumbling around the house in a daze, muttering incoherently, and often responding inappropriately. The vibrant, ambitious young man who once filled her with pride had been replaced by someone she barely recognized, someone dragged down by the toxic influence of his so-called friends. The situation was dire, and the worst part was that Sarah began to feel a deep, unsettling fear of her son. But just as she had done years ago when Michael was born prematurely and frail, Sarah summoned every ounce of strength she had. She resolved that she would not give up on him, no matter how bleak things seemed. She would fight for him, even though this battle was proving to be far more difficult than anything she had faced before. Michael resisted her attempts to help, refusing to see a doctor and stubbornly clinging to the friends who were leading him astray. "Don't you see what they're doing to you?" Sarah pleaded, her voice cracking with desperation. "You were the brightest student in your class, a gifted programmer with so much potential. Are you going to throw all that away? If you keep this up, there'll be no turning back." But Michael's response was a knife to her heart. "With them, I can finally be myself, not the perfect boy you always wanted me to be," he retorted coldly. "I'm free from your pressure. Why can't you just accept that? It'll be easier for both of us." Sarah tried everything. She scolded him, cried, begged, and tried to have heartfelt conversations, but nothing seemed to reach him. It was agonizing to watch her beloved son transform into someone she no longer knew. And all the while, guilt gnawed at her. Had she failed as a mother? Was it her fault that he had turned out this way? The overwhelming fear and helplessness she felt led her to question everything she had done, leaving her to grapple with the devastating belief that she had somehow been a bad mother. After about a year of living in turmoil and heartache, something remarkable happened. Things began to change for the better, almost as if by a miracle. Michael, who had been lost in a haze of reckless behavior, gradually found his way back. It all started after one of his prolonged absences, a period during which Sarah had nearly given up hope. But when Michael finally returned, there was something different about him. Slowly, the nightly visits to clubs diminished until they stopped altogether. Sarah no longer saw her son in the disheveled, troubled state that had once filled her with fear. He began to focus on his studies again, and his professors, recognizing his talent and potential, rallied around him. They went out of their way to support him, helping him make up for lost time. Before long, Michael was not only back on track at university, but also taking on freelance work, designing websites for companies. Sarah allowed herself to believe that her son had simply gone through a difficult but necessary transitional period. It seemed that after the storm had passed, he had matured, gained a new sense of responsibility, and taken control of his life. She was convinced that her relentless efforts as a mother, her firm yet loving guidance, her countless conversations, and her unwavering support had not been in vain. Michael had resisted her words at the time, often snapping back at her, but now it was clear that those words had planted seeds that eventually took root. He had made the right choice in the end, and she felt a profound sense of relief and pride. In the beginning, Sarah remained vigilant, watching over Michael with a mix of hope and anxiety, fearing that the darkness might return. But Michael's behavior was flawless. He was the son she had always known, kind, thoughtful, and driven. One day, sensing her lingering worry, Michael looked at her with genuine regret in his eyes and apologized. "I know I caused you so much pain," Mommy said, his voice filled with shame. "I'm embarrassed by how I treated you. I insulted you, stole from you, and all for the sake of my selfishness. You've always done so much for me, and I repaid you with disrespect." "Son, that's all in the past now," Sarah responded quickly, eager to soothe him and dispel the awkwardness. "What matters is that you've realized your mistakes and changed. It was a hard lesson, but an important one. Now, everything is going to be fine." "Yes, everything will be fine. I promise you," Michael replied with determination. "And I will pay you back for the jewelry I took. I owe you that much." True to his word, Michael turned his life around. He graduated from university with honors and landed a coveted position at a prestigious company. By this time, Sarah had already retired, but she knew that her son had succeeded on his merit. From his very first paycheck, Michael did something that touched Sarah's heart deeply. He bought her gold jewelry, even more beautiful and valuable than the pieces he had once taken. When he handed her the velvet boxes, he did so with a shy, almost childlike embarrassment. Sarah didn't need to say anything. She simply pulled him into a tight embrace, feeling an overwhelming sense of love and connection. At that moment, they both understood that they were the closest and most important people in each other's lives. As time went on, Michael continued to build his life. He bought an apartment and threw himself into renovating it, creating a space that reflected the stability and success he had worked so hard to achieve. Sarah, who had always been his steadfast supporter, now found herself enjoying the fruits of their mutual perseverance. Occasionally, they would travel together, with Michael often taking the lead in organizing fascinating tours around the country. Travel became a shared passion, and these trips brought them even closer, allowing them to explore new places and create lasting memories. Their relationship was one of deep trust and openness. They talked about everything under the sun, sharing thoughts and ideas on a wide range of topics. There seemed to be no secrets between them. However, Sarah couldn't help but notice that Michael had become increasingly evasive whenever the topic of his personal life came up, specifically when she inquired about a girlfriend. There was a subtle change in his demeanor, a guardedness that hadn't been there before. Sarah, always perceptive, sensed that there was someone special in his life, but whenever she asked, Michael would sidestep the question or give a vague response. Eventually, he told her directly, "Mom, everything has its time," and Sarah, respecting his privacy, decided to stop pressing the matter. She understood that Michael was an adult, fully capable of managing his own life. If he chose to keep this part of his life private, she would honor that choice. After all, everyone is entitled to their personal life, and as much as she loved her son, she knew that she had to let him navigate his relationships on his terms. Sarah felt a quiet confidence that when the time was right, Michael would share this new chapter of his life with her, just as he had shared everything else. Until then, she would continue to support him in the best way she knew how, with love, understanding, and the unwavering belief that he would always make the right choices. There was one subject that remained off limits between Sarah and Michael, a shadowy chapter in their lives that neither dared to revisit. Michael never spoke about what had transpired during that dark period, what had caused his sudden and drastic change, the identity of those dubious friends he had surrounded himself with, or what he was doing during those nights when he didn't come home. Most importantly, he never explained how he had managed to pull himself out of the downward spiral that had once seemed inescapable. Whenever Sarah tentatively broached the subject, Michael would instantly retreat into himself, his expression darkening, and the warmth between them would fade. Sensing his discomfort, Sarah eventually stopped asking, leaving that part of their past unspoken and unresolved. As the years passed, Sarah found comfort in simpler pleasures. She had recently taken up needlework, a hobby that brought her a sense of peace and satisfaction. Seated in her favorite armchair, she would lose herself in the delicate art of embroidery, creating beautiful pictures that she proudly displayed on the living room wall. These quiet moments were a stark contrast to her earlier life, which had been consumed by the demands of her career and raising Michael. Back then, there had been little time for such leisurely activities, but now, as she neared 65, Sarah relished the tranquility that came with her newfound hobby. The television played softly in the background, airing the latest episode of a soap opera. It wasn't that Sarah was particularly fond of these sentimental series, but they provided a light, unburdening escape, something that suited her in this gentler phase of life. As she worked on her latest piece of embroidery, the phone rang, breaking the stillness of the afternoon. Glancing at the screen, Sarah saw that it was Michael calling. "Hello, Mom." Michael's voice came through, warm and familiar. "I have a request for you. Could you prepare something special for dinner tonight? You're amazing at cooking, so pick whatever you think is best." "Of course, I'd love to," Sarah replied, smiling at the thought of cooking for her son. "But could you be a bit more specific? What exactly do you want?" "It's not for me," Michael said, his tone carrying a hint of excitement. "We're having a guest tonight. I'd like you to meet my fiancé." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What she sat up straight in her chair, her embroidery forgotten. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? I would have prepared something really special. This is such an important occasion." Michael chuckled softly. "That's exactly why I didn't tell you earlier, Mom. I didn't want you to stress or go overboard. Just make one of your favorite dishes, and I'll bring some wine. That's all we need." But that's not enough, Sarah protested, already mentally planning the evening. What about matching napkins and tableware? What about candles? And the decor? I want to make sure your fiancé feels truly welcomed and special. Michael's voice softened, and Sarah could almost see the smile on his face. "Mom, really, what candles? Just set the table for 3. Charlize doesn't like excessive formality." "But this is such a grand event," Sarah insisted, though she could hear the gentle teasing in her son's voice. "I want everything to be perfect." "It will be, Mum, because you're hosting it," Michael reassured her. "Charlize will love whatever you prepare. Let's keep it simple and intimate, just the 3 of us." Reluctantly, Sarah agreed, but her mind was already racing with ideas. This was the moment she had been anticipating, meeting the woman who had captured her son's heart. As she hung up the phone, she couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nerves. Tonight would be a special night, no matter how simple Michael wanted to keep it. For Sarah, it was an opportunity to show her son's fiancé the warmth and love that had always defined their home. "So her name is Charlize," Sarah murmured to herself, her mind racing with curiosity. It struck her that this was the only thing she knew about the girl her son had chosen. Who was she? How old is she? What does she do? Tell me something at least. She pressed, eager for any detail that might help her picture the young woman who had captured Michael's heart. "We'll talk about it when we meet," Michael assured her. "It'll give us something to chat about over dinner. Don't worry, Mom, you'll like her. She's nice." With that, Sarah's day took on a new energy. The hours flew by as she busied herself with preparations. She made a trip to the store, picking out matching napkins and candles that would add a touch of elegance to the evening. She couldn't resist buying a few more things for the table, determined to create the perfect atmosphere for the occasion. In the kitchen, she worked her culinary magic, roasting a goose with apples, a dish she had perfected over the years, along with a couple of her favorite salads. As the appointed time approached, the table was set with care, every detail meticulously arranged. Sarah's heart fluttered with anticipation. Soon, Michael and Charlize would arrive, and she would finally meet the woman who had won her son's love. She imagined Charlize as someone remarkable, someone who must be both beautiful and accomplished, to have caught Michael's eye. As Sarah went about her tasks, her thoughts drifted to Charlize's background. Who were her parents? What kind of family did she come from? Sarah believed deeply in the importance of family ties and upbringing. Would Charlize appreciate the simplicity of their home, or would she find it lacking? Sarah's heart beat faster with a mix of excitement and nervousness. Michael had said he would introduce her to his fiancée. Surely, this meant they were serious about getting married. The thought filled her with joy. She could already envision the future, with grandchildren running around, bringing new life and laughter into the home. Sarah longed to spoil them, to be the grandmother she had always dreamed of being, loving, doting, and always present. Finally, the sound of the front door opening echoed through the apartment, and Sarah's heart leaped. She hurried to the hallway to greet her guests. Michael entered first, his familiar presence bringing her comfort. But her eyes quickly shifted to the young woman who followed him inside. Charlize was slender, with a delicate, almost fragile appearance. Her skin was pale, and she moved with a shy, almost hesitant grace. In her hands, she clutched a simple leathered bag, and on her feet were worn ballet flats that Sarah recognized as the type sold in inexpensive stores. These details didn't escape Sarah's notice. "Welcome, dear guests," Sarah said, forcing a warm smile despite the swirl of emotions inside her. Charlize quietly took a seat next to Michael, her demeanor modest and reserved. Sarah sat across from them, taking in the sight of the young couple. Charlize was undeniably cute, with a softness that made her seem vulnerable. Next to her, Michael appeared more mature, and more grounded, and Sarah could see why he might be drawn to such a gentle creature. As they began to talk, Sarah learned that Charlize was a couple of years younger than Michael. She had recently graduated from nursing school and was now working at a private clinic. While Sarah acknowledged the nobility of the nursing profession, she couldn't help but wonder why Charlize hadn't pursued a career as a doctor instead. Was it a lack of ambition? Perhaps she was simply lazy, or maybe she didn't have the intellectual capacity for the more demanding path. None of these possibilities sat well with Sarah. Their conversation revealed more about Charlize's background. She and Michael had been dating for several years, having first met at a bus stop on a rainy day, a detail that Sarah found oddly charming, even romantic, in this era dominated by online dating. "Fate brought us together," Michael said with a playful sense of drama before his tone turned serious. "Charlize is my guardian angel, the love of my life." Charlize blushed and smiled shyly at Michael's words, and Sarah felt a sudden pang of jealousy. This girl, with her modesty and simplicity, had claimed a piece of her son's heart that Sarah had always believed belonged only to her. Pushing aside her emotions, Sarah gently inquired about Charlize's family. The girl explained that she had grown up in a small village, the eldest of 5 children. Her parents were poor, and life had been a constant struggle. To pursue her education, Charlize had moved to the city, where she lived in a dormitory and worked part-time jobs to make ends meet. After graduation, she found work at the clinic, which allowed her to rent a small place and afford necessities. And then, by chance, she had met Michael, and everything had changed. As Charlize spoke, Sarah couldn't help but feel a mixture of sympathy and apprehension. The girl's story was one of hardship and perseverance, but it also highlighted the stark differences between their worlds. Sarah had always provided Michael with stability, comfort, and opportunities, while Charlize had grown up knowing only struggle. Yet it was clear that Charlize had captured Michael's heart, and despite her initial reservations, Sarah knew she would have to find a way to accept this girl who had become so important to her son. As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself warming to Charlize, despite her lingering doubts. The young woman's quiet strength and genuine affection for Michael were evident, and Sarah began to see why her son loved her. Still, the questions lingered: what kind of life would Michael have with Charlize? Would this modest, unassuming girl be able to stand by his side in the years to come? Only time would tell, but for now, Sarah resolved to support her son's choice, hoping that Charlize would prove to be the partner he needed. "No wonder you fell in love," Sarah thought to herself, observing the dynamic between Michael and Charlize. She saw her son, a well-educated man with a stable and successful career, as an ideal match for someone like Charlize. The realization struck her with a pang of discomfort. Charlize had likely seen Michael as her ticket out of a life of poverty. Despite the young woman's modest demeanor and humble background, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that it was Michael's success that had drawn her in. Dislike began to simmer in Sarah's heart. She's pretending to be sweet now, Sarah decided, but after the wedding, her true colors will emerge. But I won't let that happen. I'll talk to Michael. He's blinded by his emotions right now, but he'll see the truth eventually. Determined not to cause any immediate tension or put her son in an awkward position, Sarah masked her reservations with a facade of friendliness throughout the evening. Michael, on the other hand, was enamored and content. Sarah could see the love and happiness radiating from him, and it reminded her of her past. She, too, had once been swept off her feet by a charming young man, Brent, the taxi driver who had captivated her. It took years for Sarah to realize that Brent had been using her, and the thought of Michael experiencing a similar betrayal filled her with dread. She couldn't let him make the same mistake. After dinner, Michael escorted Charlize to a taxi. Sarah managed to maintain her pleasant demeanor, smiling as she bid farewell to Charlize. But Charlize, being perceptive, sensed the underlying tension in her future mother-in-law's gaze. Michael, however, remained blissfully unaware, blinded by his love for Charlize. As Sarah watched her son return, she couldn't help but feel disappointed. She had envisioned a different life for her successful and promising son, certainly not one with a poor girl lacking higher education and the prospects that come with it. She knew she had to approach the subject delicately, without alienating Michael or pushing him away. "So what do you think of Charlize?" Michael asked as he walked back into the apartment, his eyes bright with excitement. "She's charming, isn't she?" "Cute," Sarah replied, not wanting to argue just yet. "But are you sure this is all serious between you two?" "It couldn't be more serious, Mum. I love her more than life itself, and we're getting married by the end of the year. That's my decision." Sarah felt her heart tighten at his words. "But maybe you shouldn't rush into things," she suggested, trying to sound casual. "There's no harm in dating a little longer, enjoying each other's company. A wedding is a huge commitment." "Mum, what's wrong?" Michael's expression changed, his brow furrowing with concern. "Don't you like Charlize? What's wrong with her?" Sarah hesitated, then finally decided to be honest. "She's a poor girl from the village, Michael. She doesn't have a higher education and no real prospects. You're her way out, her chance at a comfortable life. I just don't want you to be used." Michael's face darkened, his eyes narrowing. "Do you think I can only be loved for my car, my apartment, and my salary? Do you believe that's all I am, Mum?" "No, of course not," Sarah quickly protested, taken aback by the intensity of his reaction. "You're an incredible person, Michael, and you deserve the best. But Charlize, she might not be the right match for you. Don't rush into this. You'll find someone more suitable, someone who's truly your equal. I never told you this. But there was a time in my life when I had a man who was only with me for what I could offer him. It was painful and humiliating." Michael's eyes flashed with anger and hurt. "Mum, don't talk about Charlize like that," he said quietly, his tone filled with reproach. Sarah immediately realized she had crossed a line. If she continued down this path, she risked losing her son's trust and affection. He was deeply in love with Charlize, and any criticism of her would only push him further away. "And remember yourself. You're from the village too, and from a poor family. You and Charlize have a lot in common," Sarah pointed out, hoping to draw a parallel that might soften her son's stance. "Not so much," Michael replied, his tone firm. "I didn't try to improve my financial situation by marrying a rich man. I achieved everything on my own." Mom, his words were a gentle but clear rebuke, and Sarah felt the sting of his disapproval. "Okay, sorry," she sighed, sensing that she had pushed too far. "Since you've chosen her, she must be perfect." "You'll like her someday when you get to know her better," Michael said, his expression softening into a smile as if trying to bridge the gap between them. After that conversation, Sarah made several attempts to sway her son's opinion, subtly suggesting that he shouldn't rush into marriage and that he should take more time to get to know Charlize. But Michael remained steadfast in his decision, insisting that his love for Charlize had been proven over time. He even pleaded with his mother to accept and treat his fiancée with kindness. Sarah did her best to conceal her growing dislike, but there were moments when her true feelings slipped through. One such moment occurred during a visit when Sarah could no longer contain her curiosity. "Why didn't you pursue a higher education?" she asked Charlize bluntly, the question that had been gnawing at her. She had become increasingly uncomfortable when her friends asked about Michael's bride, and now she wanted to put Charlize on the spot to see how she would handle the pressure. Charlize, seemingly unfazed, shrugged lightly. "I had to work," she explained. "After I finished nursing courses, I was asked to leave the dormitory, so I needed to earn a living. You can't study at a medical university remotely, and I couldn't manage both work and full-time studies." Sarah shook her head, her thoughts swirling with judgment. She couldn't help but think that Charlize was simply lazy, using circumstances as an excuse. Sarah remembered her struggles, working from dawn until dusk without relying on anyone else to improve her situation. In her mind, Charlize's lack of higher education was a sign of a lack of ambition and drive. As the wedding plans took shape, Sarah was further disappointed when Michael and Charlize decided against a lavish celebration. Instead, they opted for a simple dinner with their closest friends at a restaurant before heading off for a beach vacation. Sarah had dreamed of a grand wedding, a bride in a flowing white dress and veil, her handsome son in an elegant suit, surrounded by family and friends from both sides. The modest affair they chose felt like a letdown, another sign that Charlize was not the match she had envisioned for Michael. After the honeymoon, the newlyweds settled into Michael's apartment, which he had renovated before the wedding. Initially, they visited Sarah often, but as time went on, those visits became less frequent until they stopped altogether. Feeling increasingly isolated and forgotten, Sarah finally called Michael, her voice tinged with hurt and indignation. "Have you forgotten about me completely?" she asked, unable to hide her frustration. Michael's sigh on the other end of the line was soft, almost resigned. "Of course not, Mom," he replied, trying to sound reassuring. "It's just that we've been busy settling into married life. You know how it is." But Sarah didn't know how it was. Not this new life where she felt like an outsider, watching from a distance as her son built a future that didn't seem to include her. The distance between them felt like a growing chasm, and Sarah feared that Charlize, whether intentionally or not, was pulling Michael further away from her. The tight-knit bond they had once shared was fraying, and Sarah struggled to accept that her son's life was no longer centered around her. Deep down, she knew she needed to let go, to allow Michael the space to live his life with the woman he loved. But it was easier said than done, and the resentment she felt towards Charlize only made it harder. In her heart, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Charlize, with her modest background and lack of education, was somehow not good enough for Michael, and that belief, whether justified or not, continued to cloud her thoughts and actions. "You're always nitpicking at Charlize," Michael explained, his tone a mix of frustration and weariness. "That's why we don't come over anymore, to avoid irritating you unnecessarily." Sarah felt her heart tighten at his words. "She's turning you against me," she replied, her voice tinged with a sadness she struggled to mask. "Mum, I love Charlize, and I love you too. Please don't make me choose between the two of you. It's hard enough as it is." Despite Michael's pleas, Sarah found it difficult to curb her criticisms of Charlize. Every little thing seemed to grate on her nerves: Charlize's simple clothing choices, her lack of interest in art and literature, the way her spoon clanked loudly against the cup when stirring sugar, even her laughter, which Sarah thought was too loud and out of place. Though Sarah tried to frame her comments as friendly advice, it was clear that her words carried a critical edge. Charlize, to her credit, never appeared offended. She would smile politely and brush off the comments, but Sarah suspected that Charlize confided in Michael later, telling him how much his mother's constant disapproval stung. With each passing day, Sarah's irritation with her daughter-in-law grew, her resentment festering like an open wound. "She's pretending to be modest," Sarah confided to a close friend during one of their regular coffee meetups. "These villagers from poor families are so cunning, worldly wise, and experienced. Deceiving my respectable, intelligent son was probably an easy task for her." The bitterness in her voice was palpable, as if by speaking it out loud, she could somehow make sense of the deep discomfort Charlize's presence stirred within her. One day, as Sarah was going about her usual routine, she was struck by a sudden, intense stomachache that left her gasping for breath. The pain was so severe that she knew she couldn't wait for hours in line at the overcrowded state clinic. Instead, she decided to visit a reputable private clinic she had heard good things about. Within an hour, Sarah found herself sitting in the plush, well-appointed waiting area of the clinic, marveling at how different it was from the sterile, unwelcoming state facility she was used to. The staff was all smiles, the atmosphere warm and inviting, and the decor stylish and modern, no unpleasant smells, no crowded waiting rooms filled with impatient, sick people. After checking in, Sarah was told the doctor would see her in 5 minutes, so she settled into a soft leather couch and absent-mindedly picked up a magazine from the table. As she flipped through the glossy pages, a familiar voice caught her attention. "Please come in. Leonard is waiting for you," Charlize said with a warm smile to a patient she was escorting to the doctor's office. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What a coincidence. She had unknowingly scheduled an appointment at the very clinic where her daughter-in-law worked. For reasons she couldn't quite articulate, Sarah didn't want Charlize to notice her sitting there. She quickly lifted the magazine, using it to shield her face while she surreptitiously observed Charlize from behind its pages. Charlize, dressed in her nurse's uniform, looked perfectly at ease as she chatted briefly with a colleague at the reception desk. She signed some documents with a practiced hand before turning back to her duties. Just then, the door to the doctor's office opened and a tall, handsome man in a white coat emerged, greeting Charlize with a smile. They exchanged a few words that Sarah couldn't hear, but their easy familiarity sent a pang of unease through her. The scene was perfectly innocent, yet Sarah couldn't help but feel a stab of jealousy and suspicion as she watched them interact. What exactly was Charlize's relationship with this doctor? For a moment, Sarah considered leaving the clinic before Charlize noticed her, but the pain in her stomach reminded her that she needed medical attention. She remained seated, gripping the magazine tightly as she tried to sort through the tangled web of emotions that seeing Charlize here, in this professional setting, had stirred within her. Sarah's heart raced as she watched the interaction between Charlize and the doctor unfold. She didn't like the way he was looking at Charlize's eyes lingered on her with an intensity that made Sarah's stomach churn. The doctor was enamored, and when he asked Charlize a question, her response brought a broad smile to his face. To Sarah, it looked like blatant flirting. She found it increasingly difficult to breathe as her emotions swirled. How could her son, Michael, have chosen this woman? A poor girl from the village, and here she was, playing around at work instead of showing gratitude for the life Michael had given her. The doctor leaned in closer to Charlize, speaking to her again, his eyes full of admiration. Charlize responded briefly, her tone professional, before hurrying down the hallway. But the doctor's gaze followed her until she disappeared into one of the rooms, confirming to Sarah what she had long feared. The scene left Sarah both shocked and strangely vindicated. She had always felt that something wasn't right about Charlize, and now she had proof, at least in her mind, that Charlize was not the loyal, trustworthy wife her son believed her to be. Despite the relief that her medical tests showed nothing wrong, Sarah's thoughts were consumed by what she had just witnessed. How could she open Michael's eyes to the truth? As his mother, it was her duty to protect him from this unfaithful woman. She needed to act, and she needed to act quickly. Without hesitation, Sarah called Michael, her heart pounding as the phone rang. When he answered, his voice was warm and familiar, but Sarah was too agitated to be soothed by it. "How are you doing?" she began, trying to keep her voice steady. "How's family life treating you?" "Everything's great," Mum Michael replied, sounding genuinely happy. "Why do you ask? Is everything okay?" "Sure, Mum. That is a strange question." "Of course I'm sure," Sarah said, trying to keep her tone light but failing to mask the tension in her voice. "I was at the clinic today where Charlize works, and I had an ultrasound done. Yes, everything's fine with me. I'm not calling about that. But you should have seen how one of the doctors was staring at her, just devouring her with his eyes." Michael was quiet for a moment before responding. "And what's wrong with that? My wife is beautiful. It's normal for men to look at her. It even flatters me." Sarah's frustration bubbled over. "I wouldn't be so happy if I were you," she said, no longer bothering to soften her words. Charlize was openly flirting with him, smiling at him. "You can't trust her, Michael." Michael's voice hardened, a sharp edge cutting through his usual calm demeanor. "Are you at it again, Mum? Charlize is the only person I can trust. Our relationship has stood the test of time." Sarah was taken aback, her voice faltering as she replied, "And what about me?" "So you can trust her, but not your mother." "In recent times, I'm not so sure about you," Michael admitted, his tone now tinged with disappointment. "You seem too vehemently against my happiness." Sarah felt like she had been slapped. Her son, the boy she had raised, was questioning her motives, accusing her of standing in the way of his happiness. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. Her constant criticisms and her inability to accept Charlize were pushing Michael away. He was choosing to believe in his wife, the woman he loved, over his mother. And in that moment, Sarah understood that if she continued down this path, she might lose her son forever. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, and for the first time she began to question whether her relentless pursuit to expose Charlize was worth the price she was paying. Inside Sarah, a turbulent mix of anger and resentment churned, bubbling just below the surface. She knew she had no power to change the situation. Life would eventually reveal the truth. From that day on, she no longer saw Charlize as merely a village gold digger or a lazy person. She now considered her an unfaithful wife as well. Michael tried to respond, but his words came out as little more than a slurred mutter. Without hesitation, the girl pulled out her phone and called for an ambulance. As they waited, she took his pulse, her face tightening with fear. Michael couldn't help but think how different she was from anyone he had met in Barry's circle, pure, noble, and genuinely concerned for a stranger's well-being. Despite the pain, nausea, and dizziness, Michael found comfort in her presence, wanting to lose himself in her kind eyes. The ambulance arrived quickly, and the paramedics wasted no time in loading Michael into the vehicle. The girl stayed by his side, holding his hand and offering words of encouragement as they raced to the hospital. At that moment, Michael realized that even in the depths of his despair, there was still room for gratitude and hope. He had been saved by a miracle, by the compassion of a stranger who cared enough to act. "You should be grateful to this girl for the rest of your life," the doctor told him sternly once they arrived at the hospital. "She saved your life." Another couple of minutes, and it would have been too late. Michael nodded weakly, unable to find the words to express his gratitude. Speaking was still difficult for him, his throat dry and his body aching. "Do you want me to inform someone about where you are?" the doctor asked. Michael shook his head vehemently. "No, my mother can't know about this. She just wouldn't be able to handle it." He knew that if his mother found out, it would break her. The thought of her collapsing with a heart attack in the ICU because of him was unbearable. "It's your right," the doctor said, respecting Michael's decision. "But let me be clear, if this happens again, you might not be so lucky. You need urgent treatment. Think about what I'm saying." Michael listened, but his mind was already elsewhere. He wasn't ready to face the reality of his situation. Instead, he decided that he would simply be more careful next time, more cautious with the pills. After all, he had seen others use them every day, people who knew how to handle their substances. He convinced himself that nothing terrible would happen as long as he stayed in control. His thoughts quickly turned to Barry and the life he had left behind, even as he lay in a hospital bed. The sterile walls and the monotonous routine of hospital procedures were oppressive. All Michael could think about was getting out, returning to the fun, the laughter, and the careless freedom that Barry's world offered. He missed the sense of belonging, the escape from the unbearable weight of his old life. But that world, he soon realized, had moved on without him. None of his new friends visited him in the hospital. He had called Barry as soon as he was able, explaining where he was and what had happened. Barry's response was detached, almost indifferent. "Yeah, that happens," he had said, his voice lacking any real concern. Barry's only advice was to keep quiet about what had happened, especially not to mention Barry's name or those of their friends to anyone. The coldness of Barry's response hit Michael hard. The people he had considered his friends were nowhere to be found when he needed them most. Yet, even this realization didn't fully break through the haze of denial that clouded his mind. He still longed to return to that life, convinced that he could somehow manage it better next time. But as the days dragged on in the hospital, with the reality of his situation pressing down on him, the cracks in his resolve began to show. The absence of those he had thought were his friends, the knowledge that he had nearly died, and the stern warnings from the doctors all began to gnaw at the edges of his mind. Somewhere, deep down, Michael knew that the path he was on could only lead to one place: another bus stop, another cold night, but next time, there might not be a miracle to save him. Charlize, the girl who had saved Michael that fateful night at the bus stop, turned out to be more than just a passing stranger. She was a nurse, and her professional background allowed her to quickly assess Michael's condition during his hospital stay. The first time she visited, it was to check on him, worried that their efforts to save him might have been in vain. When she found out that Michael was recovering, she breathed a sigh of relief, her concern evident. Their initial conversations were simple, revolving around how he was feeling and what he needed. But as the days went by, Michael found himself opening up to Charlize in a way he hadn't with anyone else. He shared the details of his recent life, the bad decisions, the university expulsion, the strained relationship with his mother, the theft of her jewelry, and the toxic crowd he had been hanging out with. As the words tumbled out, Michael realized just how awful his story sounded, and shame washed over him. He fully expected Charlize to get up and leave, to distance herself from someone so clearly lost and damaged. But she didn't. Instead, she stayed with him, listening without judgment until the end of visiting hours. They talked about lighter topics after that, and Michael found himself drawn to her even more, captivated by her kindness, her beauty, and her gentle smile. Charlize continued to visit him, and their connection deepened with each encounter. One day, she opened up to Michael about her own life. She shared how she had come to the city from a small, impoverished village, the eldest of many siblings in a family that struggled to make ends meet. Despite the odds, Charlize had excelled in her studies and worked hard, determined to escape poverty and make something of herself. She had two dreams: to help people and to rise above the circumstances of her birth. Both dreams came true when she became a nurse, a profession that allowed her to fulfill her desire to care for others while also achieving financial independence. Charlize was proud of what she had accomplished through her efforts without relying on anyone else. Hearing Charlize's story made Michael reflect on his own life. Compared to her, his struggles seemed self-inflicted, his failures a result of poor choices rather than unavoidable hardship. Charlize had faced real adversity and come out stronger, while Michael, despite having the support of his mother, had thrown away the opportunities he'd been given. The contrast between their lives made him reconsider the path he had been on, and for the first time in a long while, he began to question the allure of the reckless lifestyle he had been leading with Barry and his friends. Being with Charlize made him feel something different, something better. She was like a magnet, drawing him away from the darkness he had been living in, and every moment with her was a step towards something brighter. Michael couldn't understand why someone as pure, beautiful, and noble as Charlize would want anything to do with him. She had seen him at his lowest, pathetic, sick, and wasted from too much alcohol. It would have been natural for her to feel nothing but disgust towards him, yet she hadn't. Instead, Charlize had shown him kindness and concern, visiting him in the hospital and checking on his well-being. Maybe, Michael thought, she saw something in him that was worth saving, something that even he had forgotten existed. For so long, he had felt nothing but disgust toward himself. But Charlize's presence made him begin to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was capable of more. When Michael was finally discharged from the hospital, he returned home, managing to keep the entire ordeal a secret from his mother. Sarah never knew that her son had been in the hospital for a week. She assumed he had just been out wandering the streets as he had done so often lately. But Michael was different now. He continued to see Charlize, and they spoke on the phone regularly. Each conversation with her lifted his spirits, making him feel better, cleaner, and more alive. When they walked together, Michael couldn't help but notice the glances Charlize attracted from passers-by. She was undeniably beautiful, and it was clear that others saw it too. There was one person in particular who made Michael feel the weight of his shortcomings: Andrew, a doctor at the clinic where Charlize worked. Michael had met him once when he came to pick Charlize up after work, and it was immediately obvious that Andrew had feelings for her. Andrew was everything Michael wasn't: handsome, with sharp features, a fit physique, and a successful career. It didn't surprise Michael that Andrew was interested in Charlize. What surprised him was that Charlize wasn't interested in Andrew. Despite his intelligence, success, and clear admiration for her, Charlize had chosen Michael, a man who had been expelled from university, estranged from his family, and nearly died because of his reckless choices. Michael often wondered what Charlize saw in him, why she had chosen to care for him when she could have had someone like Andrew. The thought gnawed at him, but it also filled him with a resolve to be better, to prove that he could be worthy of her love. Charlize had seen him at his worst, and yet she stayed. Perhaps, he thought, she saw something in him that he couldn't see himself, and for that he was determined to become the man she believed he could be. The story of how Michael and Charlize ended up together was nothing short of a miracle. After Michael was discharged from the hospital, Barry made a reappearance, enticing Michael with an invitation to the club to celebrate his recovery. Despite his best efforts to start fresh, Michael found himself lured back into his old habits, craving the oblivion and reckless freedom they offered. The familiar pull of the nightlife was too strong to resist, and he soon found himself back amid the chaos he once sought to escape. As the night wore on, amidst the pounding music, the laughter, and the haze of cigarette smoke, Michael's phone rang. It was Charlize. Her voice, though calm, was laced with an urgency that sent a chill down Michael's spine. She somehow knew he was in trouble, even from afar. "Michael, where are you?" she asked, her tone steady but filled with concern. "I'm out with some friends," Michael replied, trying to downplay the situation. "You need to leave." Now, Charlize insisted. There was a firmness in her voice that Michael hadn't heard before. "Either you come to me now, or we will never see each other again." Michael paused, the weight of her words sinking in. He looked around at the crowd of dancing people, the strobe lights flashing, the air thick with smoke. For a moment he hesitated. He was having fun, and nothing bad had happened yet. But then memories of Charlize came flooding back. He saw her smile, felt the warmth of her embrace, and recalled the day she saved him. He remembered the look of quiet disappointment in Andrew's eyes when Charlize chose Michael over him. And then his mind flashed to that cold night at the bus stop, where he had been on the brink of death, only to be saved by a beautiful stranger. In that instant, the choice became clear. Michael didn't want to return to the darkness that had nearly consumed him. He wanted to be with Charlize, the woman who had shown him that there was still something worth living for. He called a taxi and left the club, heading straight to her. When he arrived, Charlize greeted him with a tight hug, holding him as if she was afraid to let go. "I was so scared it was too late, that I would lose you again," she confessed, her voice trembling. Michael held her close, running his fingers through her shiny red hair. "I'll never hang out with them again," he promised. "I don't need anyone in my life except you." And Michael kept his word. Every time Barry or anyone from that crowd reached out, inviting him to have a good time, Michael responded with a firm, categorical refusal. Eventually, they stopped trying, realizing that the Michael they once knew was gone for good. With Charlize by his side, Michael began to rebuild his life. He returned to university, throwing himself into his studies with a renewed sense of purpose. He was determined to prove to himself and to Charlize that he could be the man she believed in. As Michael worked to regain control of his life, his relationship with his mother also began to heal. Sarah noticed the changes in her son, his newfound determination, his focus, and the clear sense of direction he had gained. She was overjoyed to see him turning his life around, believing that he had finally realized the errors of his past and made the right choices. But Michael and Charlize decided to keep the darker parts of his journey hidden from her. The truth was too painful, too ugly, and they both agreed that it was better left unsaid. Michael also chose not to introduce Charlize to his mother until he was ready to do so properly. He didn't want to present her as just any girl he had met. He wanted Sarah to see Charlize for who she truly was, the woman he intended to marry. He knew it was the right thing to do, a way of honoring the deep connection they had built. 2 years after graduating from university, Michael finally felt that he had built a solid foundation for their future. He had secured a stable job, saved up enough money, and was ready to take the next step. When he proposed to Charlize, it wasn't a surprise. Both of them had known this moment was coming. But the joy in Charlize's eyes when she said yes made it just as special as if it had been. The journey that brought them together had been fraught with challenges, but it had also made their bond unbreakable. Michael knew that without Charlize, he might not have survived the dark path he had been on. She had been his light in the darkness, the reason he had fought to become a better man. And as they began to plan their future together, Michael felt a deep sense of gratitude and love for the woman who had saved his life not just once, but every day since they had met. Meeting Michael's mother, Sarah, had always been the one hitch in an otherwise blissful relationship for Charlize. From the very first encounter, Charlize sensed that Sarah didn't like her. Sarah, to her credit, tried to conceal her feelings, but her attempts were clumsy at best. Michael, ever the optimist, believed that his mother's attitude would change over time, especially after the wedding. But instead of improving, the situation only worsened. Charlize, ever gracious, pretended that everything was fine and that Sarah's behavior didn't bother her. But Michael knew better. He saw the strain it put on his wife, and it pained him deeply. To him, Charlize was perfect in every way, beautiful, kind, loyal, caring, and brave. How could his mother not see the incredible fortune it was to have such a woman in their lives? Michael held on to the hope that the announcement of their grandchild would soften his mother's heart. He believed that sharing the news in a grand, celebratory moment would change everything, which is why he kept Charlize's pregnancy a secret, waiting for the perfect occasion to reveal it. Charlize, ever cautious, had her doubts about this plan. She felt uneasy about making such a personal announcement in public, but Michael was confident that it would have a positive impact. He imagined the joy on his mother's face, believing that it would be a moment to heal all wounds. The reality, however, was far from what Michael had envisioned. The hurtful words his mother spoke that night were like a dagger to his heart. Instead of joy, there was pain, and instead of healing, there was deeper division. After the party, Michael spent hours consoling Charlize, who was deeply hurt by Sarah's reaction. He couldn't stop berating himself for being so naive, for thinking that a public announcement would be a beautiful surprise when it had instead turned into an ugly scene. Charlize had been right all along. Such news should never have been shared in public. What he had intended as a precious gift for his mother's anniversary had turned into a moment of regret and sorrow. From that point on, the young couple cut off communication with Sarah. Michael was deeply wounded by his mother's words and actions, and he refused to take her calls. But Charlize, with her gentle wisdom, urged him to reconsider. She reminded him that holding on to anger and resentment would only bring more pain, not just for him but for their growing family. "A bad peace is better than a good quarrel," she would say softly, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "The baby will be born soon. Michael and the children should not grow up in an atmosphere of hostility." Charlize's words weighed heavily on Michael. He knew she was right, but the hurt was still raw. Sarah, meanwhile, was left stunned by the fallout from that fateful night. She had never intended for things to spiral so far out of control. In the days that followed, she began to realize just how close she had come to losing her son forever. As she reflected on Michael's behavior during that difficult period, his aggression, his detachment, his disinterest in anything but money, she began to see it all in a new light. She had chalked it up to youthful rebellion, to the recklessness of dissolute living, but now she understood that it had been something much more serious. Michael had been on the brink of death, and it was Charlize who had saved him, not once but twice. The first time had been at the bus stop, where Charlize's quick thinking and compassion had brought him back from the edge. The second time had been when she issued that ultimatum at the club, pulling him away from the precipice just in time. Sarah realized that without Charlize, Michael might have easily slipped back into his old ways. It was Charlize's unwavering love and faith in him that had kept him on the right path, and that had given him the strength to rebuild his life. In her quiet moments, Sarah couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude towards Charlize, mixed with a heavy dose of guilt. She had misjudged this remarkable woman, allowing her insecurities and biases to cloud her judgment. Charlize wasn't just good for Michael, she had been his savior. And now, with a grandchild on the way, Sarah knew she had to find a way to make things right. She couldn't afford to let her pride stand in the way of her family's happiness. It was time to mend the rift, to acknowledge the love that had saved her son, and to embrace the woman who had given him a second chance at life. As we wrap up this heartfelt story, it's clear that the journey of Michael and Charlize is one filled with challenges, love, redemption, and the power of second chances. From overcoming deep personal struggles to rebuilding relationships and finding strength in the support of loved ones, their story teaches us valuable life lessons about forgiveness, understanding, and the importance of being there for those we care about, even when it's difficult. Now we'd love to hear from you. What have you learned from Michael and Charlize's journey? What is one thing from their story that resonates with you, and how will you bring it into practice in your own life? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue bringing you stories that inspire and uplift. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to hearing from you.